They can take the car with a joystick, is my understanding, and move it around a garbage can in the middle of the street, Chamath.
Wow. I don't know why this like blows their mind so much. I mean, this is like full self-driving does this all the time and you don't even have to take over. So, hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Today, I want to look at a segment from a recent All In podcast with the All In Besties. I want to look at their discussion of Tesla and Optimus and ride sharing and energy and trucking and the stock and everything else. So let's get into it.
You made some great calls on Tesla and made some great trades there back in the day. Your thoughts on Tesla in 2024?
Sharps love it. This is another one, Sharps versus the Squares. Why did the Sharps love it? Why did it go up and everybody was so confused? And I think the answer is that he's actually executing exactly to plan. And so if you're investing in a stock, what you really want is a CEO to kind of stick to a plan that is well known. So we don't have to actually guess what the plan is because he puts it out on the website. Look at the master plan part 2.
All right, just to break in here super quick, sharps and squares, I guess, is a gambling term. I did not know that before I watched this episode, but basically the sharps are the sharp people, right? You're mentally sharp and the squares are the other ones. So it sounds like a 1950s sort of term. But moving on to master plan part 2, Chamath is talking about how Tesla has broadcast what they're going to do. Master plan part 1 basically broadcast that they were going to do the Roadster, then the Model S and the Model X as well, and then the Model 3 and Model Y as well. And then, of course, Master Plan Part 2 actually updates Master Plan Part 1, which you can see right here that they published and said, it was like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Of course, at Tesla at the time, I think it was 2006. Yeah, 10 years. In 2006, nobody really cared about Tesla. They were really like a Silicon Valley joke. People laughed at them. They didn't think they were going to do anything. How times have changed in less than 20 years, obviously.
And if you start reading down, everything that he said he's going to do starting in 2016 is basically what it is. So let's take the first part, right? What did he say in the first part? He said, hey, listen, guys, this is 2016. We're going to build a Model 3. We're going to build a compact SUV, the Model Y. We're going to build a new kind of pickup truck. Okay, check, check, and check. Then he said, oh, by the way, we're also probably going to have to do a heavy duty truck and a high passenger density urban transport vehicle. So that's the robo-taxi thing that he's going to announce in August. Okay, check and check. And then he talks about the software and the investment in FSD and trying to get to a place where, you can just have a much higher probability that it will save you from an accident and it'll keep you safe when you're driving your car, which will be a large driver of why people want to buy the cars themselves. And you can see like these FSD models. So if you're a smart capital allocator, what you actually saw was a dislocated stock price. What you saw was a plan that by and large, he's been executing on at a strategic level. Underneath, there's the vicissitudes. What are the vicissitudes? Sometimes you overhire, you need to trim some fat. Sometimes you overspend on CapEx. Now, he spent about $1 billion of CapEx this quarter on AI infrastructure, so H100s for training.
So as Chamath goes through, Tesla has basically been executing on this master plan part 1 and part 2 since 2006 and then updated in 2016. There is now a master plan part 3, which is more substantial and it's about sort of taking over the world. But part of that is to spend money on the AI infrastructure. And I recently did a video. You can check it out up here if you're interested. I'll put it at the end of this video as well. But it talks about how Tesla is spending their infrastructure money. But in quarter 1 alone, they spent $1 billion approximately in AI infrastructure. Chamath says H100s. It's not all H100s. They've probably got a mix of maybe some older A100s, probably also Dojo Compute coming online, but the equivalent of a bunch of H100s have come online. The interesting thing is that Elon projected that they were going to spend another $9 billion in the remaining 9 months of the year. So that means about $1 billion a month. I know it won't be spent exactly evenly, but that is a ridiculous amount of money that they are planning on spending on AI infrastructure. And Elon says if you value Tesla as something besides an AI compute company, then you're looking at it incorrectly. And of course, with more layoffs coming in the past 24 hours or so, it's clear that Tesla is really trimming the fat, not just a little bit, but a lot trimming the fat. And of course, part of that reason is they had a negative cash flow of $2.5 billion last quarter. That is a lot of negative cash flow. But then again, they had somewhere around $26 billion in the bank. So it's not going to really hurt them that badly. They didn't have to take out loans. They just had to take money out of the bank to do this. So, things are rough and vicissitudes vicissitudes, as Chamath says, that's difficult times. Tesla is going through difficult times, but I would submit that they are going through a lot less difficult times than the competition is right now, because the competition is also facing all of the macro headwinds that Tesla is, but they're not putting in the investment to make their future brighter. We'll get back to this in just a minute, but first, did you know that your personal data is being bought and sold online right now? Yes, behind your back, data brokers are busy passing your data around for profit, and this exposes us all to potential harassment, doxing, phishing scams, and even devastating identity theft. That's where Delete Me, today's sponsor, comes in. You and I have a right to stay private and protect our personal data. I know I need to protect my online data and privacy rights, but I wouldn't even know where to start. Thank goodness for Delete Me, which takes the work out of protecting your online presence by removing you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. It's totally hands-off, so you don't have to do a thing after you sign up, which is great for me and my busy lifestyle. Delete Me proactively finds sites that have your personal data, like phone number, address, email address, and so on, and alerts the broker that you wish to have your data removed from their site. And if there's a particular custom removal request you need, just let Delete Me know and they'll take care of that too. Delete Me sends you a privacy report 7 days after you sign up, letting you know what sites had your data and what has been protected. Better yet, Delete Me is a US-based company and does all the work in-house. And Delete Me will monitor sites all year long and repeat the removal process as needed, helping protect you all year long. I also love how simple Delete Me is to use. You submit your info, experts search for it online, requests are made to these sites to remove your data, Delete Me sends you a detailed report in 7 days and ongoing throughout the year, and it keeps working all year long, protecting you from anyone trying to reacquire your data. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan and start feeling safer today. A big thanks to Delete Me for supporting this channel, and thank you too. Be sure to click my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan, and now let's get back to it.
That was a reasonable amount of money to spend on training for FSD, right? So you can start to see the tale of these two reactions. The sharps looked at the capital allocation and said, okay, you missed by $2.5 billion this quarter, but that's going to create a buying opportunity because we think it's roughly mispriced. And we think it's mispriced because going back to this plan from 2016, this is all the things that we've been underwriting, from $40 billion of market cap to 750, and now we're getting a 40% discount to buy back in. So I think it's a really interesting moment to just contrast and compare what sharps look at and then what the media breathlessly exaggerates. And I think what they wanted was to lionize the Meta earnings story, but the sharps rejected it. And they wanted to dump on Elon, and the sharps rejected that in size in both cases. And it's just a reminder to all of us, be very careful what you're reading. Because if you just took the headlines, you would have expected the two reactions to be exactly opposite. But when you vote with money, it's very clear and unambiguous because you actually move in the direction of accuracy. And that's what the stock market allows you to see. And I think this is a really interesting contrast and compare of sharps versus squares here.
Yeah. Just well recapped.
So not that I care about short-term Tesla stock prices much at all. In fact, I have general amnesia about the fact that I'm invested with Tesla, but it was a really good recap that Chamath did there. He obviously cares about stock prices and everything. And he mentioned the fact that there was a dislocation between what Tesla, the company, is doing and what Tesla, the stock, is doing. Clearly, Tesla, the company, is going through some rough times right now as well, but they are setting themselves up well for the future. And that's what Chamath was saying, basically, that the sharps, the people who are intelligent about investing, were voting with their money, that Tesla has told us their roadmap. They've pivoted, they've moved towards building their less expensive vehicle and their cybercab more aggressively, more quickly than they had planned to before, and that's a good pivot. They're investing more money into AI to get to full self-driving, to really solve that problem. And I'm going to do another video in the next few days about compound interest and full self-driving and how the two things are very similar. So definitely consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already.
For those who don't know, sharps in gambling are people like Oralabov, friend of the pod, who are just the sharpest bettors in gambling. Vicissitude, that's an unpleasant change in circumstances for those of you who don't know the word. Sachs, I don't know if you want to comment. I mean, you and I are biased in this with the relationship with Elon. Any thoughts on Chamath's take?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the stock per se. I mean, Tesla's products are amazing. They seem to be really executing well there. And I think that Elon foreshadowed on that earnings call what's coming in the future. I'm personally really curious about the Optimus robot. I mean, that has the potential to create an entirely new market. And
Okay, so let's pause on that for just a second. David Sachs doesn't care about the stock in particular, and I think that's great. I personally only really care about the company. If the company is doing well, the stock will eventually do well. But then he also mentions Optimus, and they're going to talk a lot more about this later in this segment. And by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, but of course the link to this will be in the description so you can watch the whole thing. It's almost a 2-hour discussion that covers a lot of other things besides Tesla. I'm just pulling out this one segment to look at. Anyway, they're going to get more into Optimus later in this segment, but what David Sachs is talking about here is very important. He has, I think, the clearest vision of all of these guys in terms of the total addressable market of Optimus, but we'll wait for that for a little bit later in the segment.
I think in terms of the company's problems, I think they're mostly dealing with some macro forces. So first of all, the GDP growth rate has slowed to 1.6% in Q1. So this just came out. And that was a notable slowdown relative to expectations. So first of all, you're dealing with a slowing economy, it seems like. Second, high interest rates mean that car payments are higher. If you want to finance the purchase of a car, your car payments is going to be a lot higher when interest rates are above 5%. And I think that has been a pretty big headwind for Tesla and really all the car companies over the last year or so. But I would say that I think both of those things are ultimately cyclical, and what matters is Tesla's products. I would say the only issue they have that's a real long-term issue is just the Chinese competition. Companies like BDY are ramping up production of knockoff products at low prices. And so managing the competition with China is probably the only one of these issues that's, I think, probably a long-term issue for them to deal with.
All right, so really interesting there about China. Sachs actually says BDY. I think it's a BYD, but I'm sure he just misspoke. But he also said cheap knockoffs. That I'm not positive that that's probably the best way to characterize China. Yes, they do make very inexpensive electric vehicles, but also their more expensive ones look pretty darn compelling these days. So I don't think it's cheap knockoffs. I think it's that China is really the only country that is producing vehicles that are competitive to Tesla in the EV space. And therefore, he is correct that they are going to be the long-term competition to Tesla. Pretty much all the other auto manufacturers in the world are becoming irrelevant very, very quickly as we shift over to EVs, and all of them back down in terms of the aggressiveness of their shift to EVs and move to hybrids and continue selling gas cars and all that kind of stuff. They're becoming more and more and more irrelevant to the future. So I think that Sachs is right. I don't believe they're cheap knockoffs, at least not all of them. China is clearly doing a lot of very aggressive R&D, and they're showing off their manufacturing prowess. So I would hesitate to call it cheap knockoffs, but the competition, yeah, for sure. They are definitely going to be Tesla's main competitor.
Let me ask a question here. How do you rank these businesses? Energy, Optimus, trucking, ride sharing. Energy, Optimus, the robot, trucking, ride hailing.
All right, before the four of them get into it, and Chamath is going to give a very interesting and almost contrarian answer to everybody else, but I will list them from the bottom. Trucking is the least important of the four, I think. In terms of ride sharing versus energy, that really depends a lot on how quickly Tesla can solve full self-driving, autonomy to the level they're able to actually put the vehicles out into the world in an autonomous cab situation, similar to what Waymo does in just a couple of locations at this point. So if Tesla can solve this quickly and nobody else can catch up for a long time, then Tesla will own the lion's share of that market. And clearly Elon Musk was in China recently. One of the big things that he did was establish the data security of Teslas in China and make the Chinese government comfortable with that, which is a big deal. And also it looks like he set the groundwork for being able to do autonomous vehicles, or at least testing of full self-driving. And of course it's happening in Europe as well, although very, very slowly in Europe. But this is the sort of situation, if Tesla can get regulatory approval for this stuff and get the software just good enough to work, even if it's only in limited markets at first, they can actually expand it very rapidly because they already have millions of cars on the road, as opposed to everybody else producing this kind of stuff that only has in the order of tens of thousands of these vehicles on the road. So if they can undercut a service like Uber or something like that by 50%, which is quite easy to do since they won't have drivers in the car, they may have to have remote drivers for a period of time that can take over the vehicle and maneuver it around, similar to what Waymo does at this point. But that's only a temporary thing, and they could still sort of take a loss leader and charge much, much less. They will basically destroy human-based ride sharing as they're able to in each regulatory area. That's going to take time because, of course, each area is going to have different approval processes. It's going to be a giant pain in the butt for them to do that. But it will be the kind of thing, if that holds true, that will have a gigantic addressable market. On the other hand, Jason makes a really good case for energy and the TAM for energy. So it's a little difficult to know exactly which one of those might be bigger. I kind of put them neck and neck in terms of second place. And then first place, of course, is a humanoid robot. If you can get on the order of 8 or 10 billion of these robots long term in the next 40 or 50 years on the planet, then obviously the total addressable market of that is way bigger than any of the rest of this stuff. But then, of course, if we look at energy versus ride sharing, energy is required for ride sharing. Energy is going to be required for all the compute that's going to be necessary to train these bots and do inference and actually operate the bots. So you could actually then think about energy as maybe a bigger thing than ride sharing. So I guess if you forced me to order it right now, I would say Optimus, humanoid robots, definitely number 1, energy number 2, closely beating out number 3, which is ride sharing, because ride sharing requires energy. So I think that's probably reasonable. And then trucking is way, way below the other ones.
Rank those, your number 1 or 2 in terms of potential for Tesla. Chamath, round the horn.
It's a good question. Ride sharing
Is number 1.
The absolute, probably by an order of magnitude. And
interesting.
the reason I say that is, in order for ride sharing and ride hailing to really work the way that they envision it, you will have level 5 autonomy supported in jurisdictions where, again, if you just look at part 2, the whole point is you can summon a car from your app. And if you don't have access to a mobile phone, you can go to these bus stop equivalents and just press a button and the car comes to you. And so in that world, there's just so much value add in terms of passenger safety and sustainability for the environment and less traffic. It's a gargantuan game changer. Meanwhile,
what's your number 2?
Just to contrast, Uber and Lyft seemingly are profitable because they find pricing power to raise prices. So if Tesla enters in as a third player in that field and just guts pricing, which I think would make sense for them to do, I think this thing is just gangbusters nuclear.
Okay, so again, I believe that Chamath is probably correct in the relatively near term that ride sharing is going to be very large. Again, whether you put energy or ride sharing, we're looking at a time horizon issue here. I think Chamath is thinking about in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we're thinking about Optimus and energy, we're talking about 20 to 30 years. So I think we're talking about just a difference of time frame. But I think in the near term, he is correct that ride sharing is going to be absolutely huge. But eventually it's going to be dwarfed by the humanoid robot space and, of course, by energy.
That's a really interesting point.
What do you got, Sachs? Going around the horn here.
Well, I already said Optimus, but that's based on a long-term view.
Yeah, this is a long-term question. Based on the long term, 1 and 2.
In the long term, in terms of option value, I am the most intrigued by the robot play. And Elon has pointed out that once you have robots that are capable of doing lots of different jobs, pretty much any job you point them at, that we could have more robots on Earth than humans. So it's a big future market.
So you got Optimus number 1, and who's number 2?
I agree with Chamath in the short term that ride sharing could really reach its logical conclusion with robo taxis. Remember when Uber first gained steam and people were speculating about how big the market could be, there was a lot of giddy talk about how car ownership would change and you wouldn't need to buy a car anymore because you would just use Uber all the time.
We called it going full Uber.
Yeah. And I went full Uber, or I shouldn't say full. I went mostly Uber within a couple of years of discovering
you were one of the
that
first,
product. Yeah. So I thought the potential was there, but the problem is it was just too expensive. I mean, Uber is still quite expensive, and the most expensive piece of it is the human driving the car. It's all that labor cost. So if you're able to charge for the ride purely based on fractionalizing the CapEx, and that CapEx isn't even that high because they're making these robo taxis pretty cheaply now.
So, of course, what it really comes down to is it costs us drivers who own vehicles about 72 cents a mile to own a vehicle. That's just sort of the average in the US. Obviously, it varies by country. But if you can undercut that cost, that's when you really start to eat into it. Currently, Uber and Lyft are over $2 a mile. So while that's great for just a need, or if you don't have the money or the credit to be able to purchase a car, you can utilize that, but it is not economically viable to do long term because it's just way more expensive than owning your own vehicle. But let's say that Tesla can get down to like 50 cents a mile as opposed to 72. If it gets to that point, then owning your own vehicle or maybe two vehicles or something like that becomes a really, really stupid idea economically. The economics of it will drive people towards that, which will mean the uptake will be much, much bigger than it is right now for Uber and Lyft, which is already pretty big.
And you're able to get so much more utilization out of a car.
Exactly.
Right? Because, I mean, how many hours a day do you drive your own car? Like an hour, maybe?
Less.
But a robo-taxi...
90%, I think, is the number on average that they're not used. Freeberg, who's your 1 and 2?
I think the Optimus has the highest alpha, but the highest beta. So, more upside than anything else. Just unclear how you get there, what the path is and the capital requirements. And I think there's going to be a lot of commoditization in this space. But the ride sharing is built in. It's low beta and significant alpha. So
you're 1 and 2 Optimus rideshare.
Yeah, Optimus rideshare.
All right. So as you heard it, Freeberg said Optimus and rideshare, which is a reasonable option in the near term. And by the way, I love his backgrounds. They're always really cool. And I love we've got a Mario themed background for today.
Chamath, what was your number 2 again? Just so I can recap here.
I would actually probably pick energy.
And why would you pick energy as your number 2 after ride hailing?
I think it's a pretty obvious disruption so today in America, if you look at the energy infrastructure, the utilities keep raising rates. And they keep raising rates independent of what it costs to generate energy. There are 1,700 utilities in America. They are, by law, obligated to spend, I think in the next 10 years, about $2 trillion on CapEx. They will pass all of those costs plus a margin to consumers, even though in these next 10 years, the cost of generating an incremental unit of energy will be essentially free. So I think the very disruptive play is to take 100 million homes and make them mini utilities.
Say more.
And
what does it mean, make them utilities? Yeah.
You go to a website. Again, the biggest investment I've made is in a company called Palmetto. They are close to now the largest residential solar business in the United States, if not the largest already. Now, what do they do? You're a consumer. You can go and lease or buy. It doesn't really matter. And we give you a super cheap system that goes on top of your roof, plus a battery system. And all of a sudden, you're totally resilient and independent of the utilities. And we help change the laws so that every time you have excess energy, you can put it back into the grid and get paid, which is called net metering. So if you have 100 million of these mini utilities competing against 1,700 incumbents that are forced to make huge investments and are mispriced, that's an upheaval of an enormous amount of market cap, but also an enormous amount of debt. There's like trillions of dollars of debt. So I've always thought a ginormous directional bet to make would be to go long the disruptor. The person that helps arm the rebels in this case would be the person that arms 100 million homes. And then eventually at some point just short the debt of these utilities because they won't be able to service them if enough people quit and don't need PG&E and everybody else. It'll be just massively, massively disruptive.
Okay, so unpacking that just a bit, Chamath obviously has some skin in the game in terms of electricity and energy generation and solar panels and stuff. So I can see why he's put energy second. It's an interesting conflict here because the energy in my mind is a longer term play, right? On the order of 2 decades, whereas ride sharing is on the order of 1 decade disruption. So if you're looking out 2 decades, I don't know why he wouldn't also look at humanoid robots in that space as the potential number 1 over ride hailing. So anyway, I can't get into his brain, but I think that we're looking at 2 different things. We're looking at one that's a more short-term thing, which ride hailing is definitely, if Tesla can solve it relatively quickly, like in the next 12 months and start putting out robo-taxis, they have a massive advantage and it will only compound over time. And so in the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to be a really, really big addressable market they're going to have access to. But over the next 20 to 30 years is when, in my opinion, we're going to really see humanoid robots and energy come to the fore.
So that's why I think that market could be big. I like the Optimus market. The only thing that I'll say is, in my experience, when I've looked at these generalized robots, the conclusion that I came to, and I could be totally wrong, is I suspect instead of having a generalized robot, you have very specific use case robots that look differently. So for example, there's an example, Nick, you can throw a picture, but there's something called Intuitive Surgical, which is essentially a robot that operates on you. And if you look at that, it doesn't look anything like what you would think a robot would look like. Just looks like a ginormous machine. And so I suspect that there will be people that become experts in these vertical use cases, and that will limit the TAM for a generalized approach. I could be totally wrong, but that's sort of why I ranked them the way I ranked them. But I'm pretty convinced that robotaxis are number one, and then this energy thing that upends these 1,700 utilities in America is number two.
Okay, so let's take a moment here. The second half of this video is where these four gentlemen, who are very smart, very well educated, show that they don't know as much as those of us who are completely obsessive about Tesla and everything do. It's really interesting how this works out. So what Chamath here is, he's purporting that this robot, this doctor robot, can do, and which is an amazing thing. It's teleoperated. You could see the person actually operating it themselves with, a microscope and stuff. Amazing technology, really, really cool, not autonomous. The whole thing about humanoid robots, and I think he's being distracted by the form factor, these humanoid robots, yeah, they're going to look sort of like humans for a period of time, but then it's going to be a Cambrian explosion. We're going to see things that look like humanoid robots. I just had the chance to talk with Jordy Rose and Herbert Ong yesterday on his channel. Definitely check out that video. Really, really cool. But Jordy's all about, like, I don't really care about legs right now. I just want a wheeled robot. Walking is a solved problem. It's just something to show off to your investors and to the public. It has nothing to do with the utility of the robot. Other people strongly disagree with him, but already you can see a bifurcation, right? There's the wheel-based robots and there's the leg-based robots, and eventually we'll just have arm-based robots. The important part is you need the dexterity. In other words, you have to have grippers and things like that, and fingers that can move in various ways and everything, which of course is what Jordy and Sanctuary have put a lot of effort into, is the hand. But even more importantly than that, you need the brains. Even with just two-finger grippers with really good brains, you can see these robots able to do incredible amounts of work. So it's really all about this part, or probably here. For the robots, it's going to be in their chest more than likely. But anyway, it's all about the brains, and what Chamath is missing here is he's missing that part. He's like, oh, look, this is a robot that doesn't look like a human. But number one, of course, it's not even autonomous, but assuming that that thing eventually gets to be autonomous, is I will put that into the category of humanoid bots because it's replacing direct human labor, a surgeon, with an autonomous vehicle. But the most important part is the brains, and that's the part that he is not seeing. And we're going to see more and more of this throughout the second half of the video from all four of the participants.
All right, J. Cal, you are the third investor in Uber. Are you worried about your investment? As I understand it, you still haven't sold, have you?
I've sold slightly more than the majority of my holdings over the years, 2 private transactions, and then I held everything post going public. And I'm still long Uber. I give number one to Optimus by far and away, because I think the build of materials on Optimus could be 10K or less. I looked at some of these other startups that are in the space, and I've been studying it a little bit just out of curiosity. And so at a 10K bomb, I think they could rent you one of these for $300 a month or something like that, a subscription. I think every human on planet Earth eventually will have a robot. So I know that's crazy, but I think Optimus will dwarf the entirety of Tesla's other businesses.
So there it is. Jason puts it out there right there. It's going to dwarf everything else. Now, this is long term. It's going to take a while to make 8 to 10 billion of these. And Tesla, of course, won't own the entire market. But even if they only own 10 or 20% of a market of 10 billion robots, that is going to dwarf everything else. And if they do robots as a service, or RaaS, and they're only renting these things and not selling them, it's not one single transaction where you make $1,000 per robot or whatever that price is, but it's an ongoing revenue stream. So that is going to be absolutely massive for Tesla and anybody else who gets to scale fast enough.
Number 2 is energy, clearly, I think, and number 3 is ride hailing. Number 2, energy, fairly obvious what's happening here. If you look at what's happening with data centers, it spiked, I think, from like 3 or 4% of energy now to like, is it 15%, Chamath? I think we had a discussion with Phil Deutsch.
I think it's 18%. It's almost 20%. It's a huge number now.
So just real quick, I've been doing this in real time, and originally I really did think ride hailing was number 2, but the more I think about it, the more they're right. And of course, I've begun to think about energy as money right now, especially thinking about Bitcoin and everything. I'm going to do some videos on that very, very soon as well. So definitely stay tuned for that. But I'm really starting to think more and more that both Chamath and Jason are correct, that energy over the next 10 to 20 years is going to become effectively money. It's going to be that important. And so it is going to be a very, very large market for Tesla and the other players that are disrupting the current energy market.
Okay, so we dovetail the two stories together. These H100s are beasts, cooling beasts. This is like, you can't even, Phil Deutsch was telling us in the group chat, like you can't even cool some of these places. And what that means is there's going to be demand for energy. To Chamath's point, if each home becomes a little provider, it's going to create some regulation change, I believe. I'm no expert on the regulations. We should definitely have Deutsch on the pod at some point to talk about this. But imagine these, like in Texas, they keep having the grids go down. And in Australia, they have the grids go down. It's going to be so annoying for consumers to have the grids go down while demand spikes for data centers. All the regulations are going to get opened up to put batteries and solar everywhere.
It's also dangerous. I mean, people die when these blackouts and outages occur. And also, like we saw in San Carlos here in the Bay Area, nat gas lines explode. PG&E is responsible for forest fires. I mean, if you can do your part to basically get off these grids, use somebody like Palmetto or somebody else and just get solar, Tesla, and be done with it. And at least you're not contributing to some of these downstream errors.
Yeah, and so I agree 100%. And by the way, if you can make money from your solar and your batteries and somebody else picks up the cost of installation, I think there's some arbitrage here, Chamath, to be had. And I think that's like what you discovered when you did your first principle approach to this. So I think those two businesses will be far bigger than anything else they're doing. Now, on ride hailing, I'm using FSD 12. I have been using Autopilot. I was one of the first users of Autopilot, from the beginning, like literally. And FSD 12 is a significant improvement. That being said, all of these systems work really well in a controlled grid, like we've seen with Waymo in Arizona and in, limited parts of Los Angeles and San Francisco. I think that vision is 5, 6, 7 years out from having low single-digit percentages. And you may have seen Uber has incorporated Waymo and the taxis in London into their system.
Okay, so Jason is definitely right. Version 12 of full self-driving is great, but it's not quite there yet. But when he talks about 5, 6, 7 years away, I think he is way off. I think we're talking about 1 to 2 years away. I really believe that Tesla is going to push very, very hard to get at least one robo-taxi ride, even if they have to give it away for free, in a place like San Francisco by the end of 2024. So I think we're looking at 1 year, and Sachs is just about to call him out on this. But I think that he is underestimating the rapidity with which Tesla will be able to roll out the cybercab, the robo-taxi solution. Again, probably starting with our Model Ys and Model 3s that we have in our garages, that people will Uber out. Maybe, in fact, Jason is a little bit blinded by his investment in Uber and doesn't want them to go down in flames. But whatever the situation, I really think that he is very, very far overestimating the amount of time this is going to take. I could be wrong, of course, as well. I have a great deal of optimism bias, but I think we're going to see the first cracks of this starting this year because regulatory approval is already there. And if Tesla can put remote drivers in the car, in other words, if they can do the same thing that Cruise and Waymo have done, which is just have somebody sit there and remotely operate the vehicle to get out of a pinch, out of a bad situation, that person could cover 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 vehicles at once, and it would just flash up to them, whichever vehicle is having problems, and then they would take over for a few seconds and they would get the car out of that situation and move it on. If they can come up with that as an interim solution, or even put humans in the car, in the driver's seat, like Cruise and Waymo did back in their early test phases, but the person doesn't touch the wheel or anything like that unless absolutely necessary, those are all ways that Tesla could roll out robotaxi today, honestly, if they wanted to. It's just that they're not interested in that, but they are going to be interested in that soon. So I don't think 5 to 6 years here at all.
I think Uber's ultimately going to be the place people go to call up one of 20 different self-driving. I think a lot of people are going to get there at the same time. Wouldn't be surprised if Elon gets there first. But I think that's 5 or 10 years out, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of getting to scale.
So yeah, I just think he's completely wrong. I think if Tesla gets there first, Tesla gets there first, and nobody else can catch them. It shows a fundamental lack of understanding of the difference between Waymo and what they're doing and the very, very rigid, impossible to scale and the very rigid, difficult to scale version of full self-driving they have, which is really riding on rails, and what Tesla is doing. Totally different thing. If Tesla gets there first, Tesla will take the lion's share of the market anywhere it has regulatory approval to do so.
I would never, ever bet against Elon, seeing what he's done. Watching.
Wait a second. When are you saying that self-driving will be good enough to power just one robo-taxi? Let's just forget about the scale. Just like, when will it be good enough to have like a steering wheel free car?
Yeah. So if you can just look at Cruise and Waymo and you can have your answer, which is today in a contained environment with remote drivers intervening on some regular basis, it works. So people are taking Waymo, San Francisco, LA on a pretty regular basis. Cruise, I think, got kicked out of San Francisco. But if in the Cruise data, there was a lot of interventions going on. I suspect Waymo's doing a lot of interventions. So I think...
I don't want to be a proponent of this, by the way, but bleep out his name, was saying that, Jason, with FSD, they're very strict that you have to be holding the steering wheel and stuff.
Yes.
But you can go to Alibaba and buy something that hacks that, right?
It's a weight. A lot of
I'm
people
not
are doing
promoting that.
this.
I'm not promoting this.
No.
I'm not promoting this. I'm just saying that it does
So anyway,
exist.
to answer your question, Sachs, I think today, or let's just say by the end of this year, an FSD-12 could be operating in a constrained space, just like Waymo is.
So there you have it. It can operate in a constrained space, but the difference between Waymo and Tesla's full self-driving is it is a generalized solution. So if it can operate in San Francisco, it can also operate in Los Angeles and maybe not New York. New York is its own weird little beastie, but should be able to operate in a lot of parts of Atlanta and Jacksonville and Miami, et cetera, et cetera. So it can expand relatively quickly. I know it is the best trained currently in California. That's just the way it is, but it's getting damn good. I mean, I drive around Athens all the time and I disengage because I want to, but I really don't have to do any critical disengagements, and the car can get me where it needs to, except for some things like parking lots and turning around and stuff. So those are relatively small things that need to be corrected, and if they have remote operators, they could easily get out of those situations when they need to. So what Jason is saying is, yeah, he expects also to have a robotaxi ride by the end of 2024, but he doesn't think they'll be able to scale anytime soon. But I'm like, no, they've got all the vehicles out on the roads. They don't have $150,000 custom built vehicles. They have vehicles that a ton of people own, and they have millions of them, not tens of thousands.
Now, to get it to all regions, back roads, weather, there's a lot of edge cases here. So I think the more important question is, when can automated be 5% of rides or 10% of rides? And I think that's 5 or 10 years from now. I do think a couple of people will reach that moment at the same time.
So 5% or 10% of rides, that is a pretty big metric. I mean, people do a lot of driving every day, but we can localize that a little bit. When will it be 5 or 10% of rides in San Francisco or another small area? That's what's really going to matter, because the revenue generation will go up very, very rapidly. As far as dirt roads and weather and all that kind of stuff, no, you don't really have to worry about that. We only really need level 4 autonomy. We don't need level 5 where it can do everything for it to be very, very viable economically. Because remember, all you have to do is go after large urban areas. That's where a preponderance of rides are being taken right now on things like Uber and stuff. You don't have to go into small markets for a long time because those are not very important economically. You want to go into big cities, urban environments where lots of rides are being taken all the time. People are already used to using things like Uber, and I think that it's going to scale relatively quickly.
Let me show you a video. This is one of my coworkers at Kraft took this. This wasn't me, but he was riding in the back of one of these robo-taxis. I think this is San Francisco or New York. I'm not sure which one.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no one.
So first of all, Jaguar with all the buttons, it looks like a 1990s interface, which is hysterical. Also, Jaguar, it's a very expensive vehicle, but it just shocks me how little they know about this. It's like a brand new to them except for Freeberg. He's the only one who's like, yeah, I've ridden in one before. I don't know why these guys, they're very much at the forefront of technology, but it just goes to show if you're not really in this bubble that something like this kind of blows your mind. It's like, yeah, this has been around for a couple of years where they've had driverless rides in very restricted circumstances. And again, I believe that Tesla, if they wanted to, could do this today with the right remote drivers or with a person sitting in the driver's seat or something like that. They're just not interested in doing it yet until they can scale it up rapidly.
The driver's seat.
Yeah, but there's a
Jesus.
safety driver watching this remote, I believe, which is what Cruise was doing. And then when they get to a point where they can't figure it out, the human comes in,
I don't
intervenes.
see a safety driver. Where's the safety driver?
No,
No,
a
it's
remote
remote.
safety driver.
Remote. But I have to say, watching this video, that is the coolest bloody thing. I mean,
Yeah.
this is amazing.
So what really strikes me as odd is that they're saying this is amazing when I believe all of them have driven with Tesla's full self-driving. So it's like, I don't know why this would blow your mind. This is the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, of course, my car can do that right now. I could go sit in the back seat and very likely without any remote intervention or anything, the car would get me from one place to another. Now, of course, I would have to defeat the safety systems, which I don't want to do because that would be a terrible idea. But you could do this technically with a Tesla right now. So I don't know why this is impressing these guys so much. Maybe it's just all the buttons and maybe the fact that it says Jaguar on it. Maybe that's what's impressing them.
I'll be
I
honest,
think it's I think it's underrated in terms
Me
of how
too.
significant this is going to be.
me too.
Yeah.
I
And
totally
look,
agree
if
with you.
this is a Jaguar, look at that. It's a Jaguar.
Yeah,
So you're telling me that Tesla's not going to have something at least as good as this
better.
soon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
no, I think they have it already. If you drive FSD 12, I believe FSD 12 probably could be working today in San Francisco under a controlled grid with the remote drivers like the other people have. If somebody knows about this, by the way, can they send us information? I'm Jason at calicanis.com for life. Just send me a picture. I'll keep it on the DL. I won't reveal sources of who these remote drivers are, what their setup looks like. I'm very curious to understand how the remote drivers work for Waymo and Cruise.
I'll just add to that. If you have secret pictures, you can always send them my way as well.
Can they park the car?
They can take the car with a joystick, is my understanding, and move it around a garbage can in the middle of the street, Jamal.
Wow.
Again, I don't know why this like blows their mind so much. I mean, this is like full self-driving does this all the time and you don't even have to take over. So I don't know. Like I said, it's very interesting to see how these guys' minds are blown by things that seem really, really, old news to me. But maybe that's just because I live in such a bubble with all this stuff that I just expect this to be the case right now.
See the future of this, like let's say 10 or 15%. Let's say 10% of the time it needs an intervention. 1 an hour, 2 an hour. Having some remote person in Manila, wherever, watching 10 videos concurrently and looking for moments to do this.
It's incredible.
Cruise workers intervened to help the company's cars every 2.5 to 5 miles.
And just to note here, if you ever want to really understand how much of a party trick this was, Cruise's vehicles, the remote operators were taking over every 2.5 to 5 miles. That is nothing. I mean, I can do it's about a 12-mile journey to work for me, and I can do that without intervention. I do intervene sometimes because I'm just get bored or lazy or more aggressive than the car or whatever. But in terms of needing to intervene, I don't have to do it except getting out of my driveway and getting into the parking lot. That's it. So everything else it can do. And so that's 12 miles intervention free minus the parking lots, which yes, they do still have to work on. But if you consider that we're talking about pre-mapped LiDAR-based situations here, and they still have to take over every 2.5 to 5 miles, that's not true autonomous driving. That's just a party trick.
According to a New York Times article. All right, and just if we score everybody's rating here, I give 2 points for first place, 1 point for second place. Optimus got 6 points, ride-hailing 4, energy 2, trucking 0. There you have it, folks. There's your scores from the Besties.
What is Waymo? What is that? Is that like Uber
That's
and Lyft?
Google self-driving. They spun it out.
But what is it? Is it like a
LiDAR,
service?
$150,000 cars.
Uh-huh.
And,
But it competes with Cruise?
yeah, they're doing what Cruise did.
It was the original self-driving car company that Google
Yeah.
set up, and then they set up Google X around it, and
Just explain to me the market, guys. I'm not sure I get it. So there's Waymo and
it's
Cruise.
Uber. Yeah.
But there's Waymo and Cruise, which are like, there's no drivers. And then there's Uber and Lyft, where there are drivers.
So again, there you have it. It just blows my mind that Chamath, who is a very, very deeply researched person who knows a lot of stuff, just does. This seems super basic to me, but yes, that is exactly the situation. You've got Waymo and Cruise that don't require drivers, but they're Uber. They're essentially Uber without drivers.
That's the basic, right? Is that?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's also Aurora. I don't know if Uber owns a percentage of that or not, but I think you know about Aurora.
Aurora was set up by Chris Urmson. He was the original engineering lead on Waymo inside of Google. When they did a management changeover, there was a big falling out. A lot of people ended up leaving the Waymo program. Chris left, took a bunch of people with him, and started Aurora, which was basically software to do autonomous driving that they were then going to license into OEMs. So that company got backed by a bunch of VCs and ended up going public via SPAC, and it's publicly traded today.
I see.
Yeah.
Uber owns 26% of Aurora, or actually now it's down to 20%. There's also Zoox.
They made an investment in it. Yeah.
There's also Zoox, which is part of Amazon. So I think there's about 10 people who are going to get to the finish line at the same time. I think it's going to be a very crowded space.
But again, some of these guys are trying to make software for OEMs so that the OEMs don't have to build their own autonomous platform.
Mhm.
And some of them are trying to make a driving service like Waymo. And then some of them are like Tesla has a driving car. They actually sell cars. So different models.
Yeah.
But they're all going to converge. Yeah.
I actually disagree that there's going to be 20 or 30 of these, because I actually think that self-driving is really, really hard. And we know that Tesla has been spending years getting to this point, and then Google as well. So I'm not sure why there'd be more than 2 or 3 companies that can do self-driving.
There are 10 or more pursuing it. I do agree it goes down to 4 or 5. And then it's a question of, is it a winner take all, winner take most?
So just to jump in here, Sachs is definitely the most correct about this, and it might only be one. It might only be Tesla and, of course, some companies in China as well. I don't believe anybody else has the data flywheel. I don't believe that they understand how to do it exactly right. I mean, it's become obvious that end-to-end neural networks are the way to go, but the specifics of that architecture and the mystery of it, and particularly the data flywheel, sucking in that data, getting the right kind of data that you need, and having the compute to train and all of that stuff, reduces the playing field to very, very few competitors, and whoever gets there first is going to have this, huge advantage. And it's how is somebody else going to catch up without running faster than Tesla does? And if they can't do that, then they're not going to catch up. And so my prediction is actually that Tesla just wins this race, at least in Europe and the United States. I don't know about China. And that then they license it out to other OEMs, and then they use it to run their own robotaxi fleet and so on. And so they're going to have the lion's share of this market.
And that's what remains to be seen.
But I mean, you need a ton of data to make it work, and you need a lot of data around edge cases. And so the advantage Tesla has is they actually have
so
real
many cars on the road. Yeah.
They have real cars on the road with real driver minutes, and with drivers using the previous version of FSD and making interventions. So they're constantly getting better. I think Google seems to be putting enough resources into this to get somewhere.
I'll just throw in that Google is indeed putting in a ton of resources, but they're not doing it correctly, at least as far as we've seen. Now, maybe they've got something similar to their RTX project with the humanoid bots that's going on for cars. But if they're looking at Waymo as the way that they're going to do it, it is not scalable. That's just not going to work. And again, it's kind of a glorified party trick. So that means they could take some small segments of market share, but it's not going to be significant, and it's not going to be able to go global rapidly.
I don't think a lot of companies are going to figure this out. I think it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 3 companies figure this out.
Well, Waymo has the most on the road right now. I think Cruise is second to them in terms of in market. So the question is, how quickly can Elon get this out?
Have any of you guys taken one of these robo-taxis?
I haven't taken one.
No, that's one of my coworkers.
Yeah, we got to do
Freeberg,
that.
have you taken one?
Yeah, they're cool. They just move around.
You did take one.
Like, yeah, they're all over the city. You can take them in San Francisco now.
Yeah.
You have to download the Waymo app?
Yeah, and there's like a wait list, and then you get on it, and they're letting people on, and then you just get on it and go for a ride. Pretty cool.
By the way, someone tweeted something kind of funny. They said, it took Uber years and years and like $1 trillion to finally get to profitability, and now they're about to get disrupted by robo-taxis. This is brutal.
Unlikely. I think unlikely. I think it's going to be a very slow rollout.
So there you have it. It ends on Jason, who is an Uber backer, saying that it's not going to be disrupted by Tesla. I think he is dead wrong about this, and I don't think it's going to be slow. I think it's going to be really fast. I think that Tesla more than likely is putting out feelers for regulators right now, and they're probably trying to lay the groundwork and show them the data and all of that stuff, so that I think what they want to do is not just roll out in a limited market like San Francisco, but they want to try to hit a bunch of places in the United States States and maybe Canada as quickly as possible to just suck the oxygen out of the room for everybody else. And I think that they will be able to do that. I think they're going to get there with enough of a lead over anybody else who can compete that they're just going to essentially take over because nobody can catch them. And how would you even try? All right, so that's what I've got for you all today. Let me know what you think about what everybody in the All In podcast said. And also let me know about the format of this. This is an experiment to try a reaction video. So let me know in the comments what you think about that. And of course, a big thanks once again to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description to get 20% off any consumer data protection plan. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.